The Corporate Transparency Act, whether you're ready for it or not, it's coming to a theater near you on January 1st, 2024. If you have ever, and I mean ever, filed an LLC or corporation or any other type of entity with the Secretary of State, then this is definitely going to affect you. Because the government, through FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, is looking to combat money laundering, tax evasion, and other illicit activities. So in this video, we're going to talk about who needs to file, what needs to be filed, by when does it need to file, and what are the penalties if you fail to file. Who needs to file to comply with the Corporate Transparency Act? There's actually three categories of people that need to comply. One is what's called a reporting company. So the first is the company or the LLC. And basically it's any company that has filed either domestic or foreign with one of the Secretary of State. So that generally means we're talking about LLCs, LPs, corporations. If you've ever filed any one of those entities, that is going to be a reporting company, and that's going to trigger this compliance. And if you're the reporting company itself, that's not the bad part. So you're going to have to file the name of the company, obviously, the address of the company, and where you formed it, what state, what jurisdiction, and then also what's called a unique identifying number, which generally would be like the EIN that you get for the company or the actual, corporate entity. It identifies the entity. So that's what you would have to file if you're the reporting company. So that's not the end of the world. The second category, though, that needs to file is anybody who's a beneficial owner of the reporting company. And a beneficial owner means anybody who owns more than 25% of the company. So if you have an LLC and you own 25% or more of that company, you are a beneficial owner. Or if you have what's called substantial control of the entity. So if you're the manager, if you're the director, if you have a huge voting block that you can hire and fire the manager, make decisions, if you're that person, you're also considered a beneficial owner. And this is where it gets a little bit more onerous, because those folks need to file not only your legal name, number two, your home address, not a PO box, not your business, but your home address. Number three, your date of birth. And number four, also a unique identification number, which generally is going to come from your like a driver's license number or maybe a passport number. And then also you're going to have to upload the actual copy of the driver's license, or at least the front page, or your passport. And again, anybody who has really substantial control. So I think for syndicators, probably at the end of the day, you're going to own less than 25%, because the whole team's going to own less than 20, right? For the syndication LLC, you're going to own less than 20%. But the question is going to be who has the control over the syndication LLC, which is going to be the management LLC, right? And then we're going to figure out who owns 25% or more of the manager LLC, and or who is the co-managers or managers of that entity, because those all are going to be beneficial owners, and they're all going to require that you file these 4 or 5 things with the governmental agency and FinSec. The last category of people, which is what really bums me out, is that also the applicant has to disclose information, meaning whoever sets up the LLC. So if you're using Premier Law Group and we create the NSE, we have to comply. If you're using, LegalZoom or some other, corporate firm, they're going to have to do it. And so whoever is the actual person who files the entity on behalf of the company, or whoever is directing that person to file, right? So there's usually 2 people there. The person who mechanically files, goes on the Secretary website, fills it out, but also the person who directs, they also are considered fall under who needs to file. And those, same thing, name, date of birth. Here you can go with your business address, and then also your driver's license, passport, kind of same information. Now, the good news is, I will say that if you're doing this over and over again, which a lot of us are, a lot of us have multiple LLCs, obviously. Every time you do a deal, you've got a new syndication LLC, you got new stuff. You can fill in all this information to the government, and they can give you like an ID number. And so that in the future, instead of having to give them all this information, you have this ID number that you submit in lieu of all the documentation. So you really only have to do this once on the front end, then you get this identification number, so that when you file it in the future, you let your filer know, this is the number I have, and we can use that as long as it's been updated and you represent that it's been updated. That's the good stuff. So that's who and that's what needs to be filed. Number 3 is when. This will depend on when you set up the LLC. So if you or when I say LLC, I mean entities or corporations, whatever. But if you set up the entity prior to January 1st, 2024, because that's when this law goes into effect, then you have 1 year to get your act in order and get this information to the government for all of your active entities. So if you have a bunch of active entities that you're not using anymore, this is the time for you to go back and dissolve them. In the past, we haven't really been forceful to tell people to formally dissolve companies. We're like, hey, just let it be and it'll automatically dissolve, or it'll administratively dissolve. Now I would recommend, if you're no longer using an entity, you want to get rid of it, you want to dissolve it so that you don't no longer have to continue to report this ongoing requirement. So if it's prior to January 1st, 2024, then you have 1 year from January 21st, so you have till December 31st, 2024 to get that information. But for any new companies that come in, you have 30 days to comply. So starting January 1st, 2024, you're going to have 30 days to comply, depending on where you fit into this, in order to get your filings done. Now, there is a proposed regulation right now, a proposed rule by FinSec, probably because they don't have their act together, that they're looking at maybe extending that to 90 days. So it'll be similar to sort of what California has this requirement is within 90 days. But right now it's 30 days. And then if it ever changes, so if you file a company and there's a change to the beneficial owner or the managers, or now you have somebody else has substantial control, any change, that filing with the FinSec needs to be amended within 30 days of that change. That's number 3, which is the when it needs to be filed. And then the last one are the penalties. So the penalties depends on whether it's just an honest mistake or you intentionally didn't do this. And so if it's an honest mistake, it doesn't help you too much. $500 per day per incident. It's a lot. $500 fine per day per incident. And on the criminal side, you can actually be up to $10,000 fine and 2 years in jail. Now, I don't know when people are going to go to jail, but as you guys know, I have that ebook called The 5 Things Every Syndicator Must Know to Stay Out of Jail. I may have to add this to that list because I always kind of joke, you're not really going to go to jail. This one, you could. Now, again, I don't know when that's going to happen, if it's going to be if you just keep violating this thing for a decade and eventually, but that's the maximum you could get is $10,000 in fines and 2 years in jail, unless it's willful. If you're intentionally avoiding this because you don't want to give the government information and you know about it and you don't do it, and that number goes up from 10,000 to 250,000, and the number goes from 2 years in jail to 5 years in jail. That's how serious they're taking this. It really creates an issue for the applicant. So keep this in mind too, sort of, I don't say best practice, but just be aware of this, is that every company that I've talked to that does the filings of LLCs, because there's a penalty for us as the applicant to not get the information, they're not going to file your LLCs anymore until they have all this information from you. Right, so just keep that in mind. Make sure that you have all this information ready to go, because if you're in a rush, you need to get this LLC created, unless you want to go set it up yourself, which is probably the only way you could really do it. If you're asking somebody else to do it, whether it's a law firm, whether it's a filing company, they're not going to file something for you unless they already have all this information, because if you end up not providing that information in the future, now the applicant has violated this rule and is unable to file this filing within the 30 days that's required. So